China's foreign ministry has urged the international community to oppose what Beijing is NATO's increased influence in the Asia-Pacific region. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian made the call as leaders of South Korea and Japan are attending NATO's annual summit in Madrid as observers for the first time.
Speaking at the news conference ahead of the NATO Summit, China Foreign Ministry urged NATO not to use the Russia-Ukraine conflict as an excuse to provoke a new Cold War. China also opposed the bloc's involvement in the Asia-Pacific region.
Some NATO members continue to send airplanes and warships to conduct military exercises in the waters around China, creating tension and provoking contradictions. NATO continues to break through regions and fields and advocate bloc confrontation. The international community should remain highly vigilant and firmly oppose it. They should also stop trying to launch a new Cold War. They should give up their Cold War mindset. Stop trying to mess up Asia and the world after messing up Europe.
Meanwhile, the NATO summit is expected to tackle China's deepening ties with Russia after the invasion of Ukraine and to address China's growing international ambitions.
Well, for some reaction, we're now joined by Russian journalist and international relations commentator Rustem Safronov. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so
yes, my pleasure.
Inviting South Korea and Japan to a NATO meeting, is that provocative?
That's provocative in the sense it's probably targeting China and trying to transfer the activity of NATO to Pacific area of potentially military confrontation.
But
so
why,
from that perspective, it's a great concern for Chinese.
Why would there be that interpretation, though?
Well, otherwise I don't really see important reason. I mean, partially probably they trying to involve South Korea and Japan in potential confrontation with Russia as well, since West is under the circumstances of contemporary current military operation of Russia in Ukraine, West is trying to tighten the noose around the Russian neck. So, and from that perspective, additional support in Asian flank of Russia would be also important for the West.
Okay, it looks as if it's pointed at China, but Russia would be watching as well, wouldn't they? And what would they be thinking?
Well, Russia, under the circumstances, has now worsened relations with Japan, and all negotiations about status of the Kuril Island are totally stopped. Basically, Russia gave up an idea which was agreed upon preliminary during the time of Khrushchev, like 2 islands would be finally given to Japan, as Japan would sign with Russia peaceful agreement. Technically, Russia and Japan still didn't finish the war, and in spite of countries having some kind of business relations and so on, at least they had before, they didn't have really normal peaceful agreement. And a stumbling block on that was a status of 4 Kuril Islands. So as a compromise in the end of the 50s, Nikita Khrushchev agreed to sign the treaty, peaceful treaty with Japan, and giving them 2 islands. So, but it never was really completed. So, and basically right now, under the circumstances, that hope was totally buried. So probably Japan could be considered whatever Russia now as an enemy, and could thinking to have some kind of revengeful ideas about that. That's why Japan is participating in that. South Korea is obviously always had a concern about North Korean nuclear weapons, and that's another reason for them to be there. And the West is just trying to build up a bigger coalition against two powers, against Russia and against China. Obviously, Russia is a current adversary of NATO, but in the perspective for United States, China is much more dangerous and important adversary. So,
China usually proceeds with caution and with great restraint, but for Japan and South Korea to do joint military drills with the United States just days before this NATO meeting, that is quite provocative for North Korea. And we have a leader there who perhaps doesn't show the same kind of restraint and move towards diplomacy as China. Could that be a potential fire?
Well, in general, the situation in the world is quite explosive nowadays. That could be a potential alienation of the fire. And look at the situation around Taiwan Island. Recently, Chinese ambassador in France mentioned about desire of People's Republic of China to restore control over Taiwan by any cost, including probably with military means. So usually before, Chinese avoided that kind of direct statement after last attempt of the conflict at the end of the 50s around Taiwan. So situation in the world is in general very, very dramatic, and any little detail could play the role of fire with a power keg. So, and we could see that in Europe, where confrontation of entire the West in territory of Ukraine with Russia, we could see that in Southeast, and it's have additional dramatism.
Is the West, is America succeeding in gathering the troops, gathering allies, gathering forces, and gathering influence? And if so, will China just sit back and watch? Could there be some kind of reaction, and what might that be?
Obviously, China would stay away from European theater of military operations, and they wouldn't involve. They show some understanding of Russian position and understanding of the reason why war got started. But obviously, Western countries is not going to participate in a conflict around Taiwan. That's solely responsibility of Taiwanese and United States, which had a treaty about mutual defense with the Taipei, and in that point, if something happened over there, we could see another global explosion. But for now, for that very time, Washington has a task to gather all Western allies in trying to unify them to confront Russia in the territory of Ukraine and solidify position of Western countries, which obviously look into the situation a little bit of different. And we could see France and Germany probably would find some kind of peaceful solution, but Washington and London are pushing Ukraine fight back with Russia till the last Ukrainians and promise great support and so on. So that's prolonging the conflict, and obviously right now that huge Western coalition have to solidify their positions and clarify everything for themselves. And Washington is in the beginning of that process. Biden already declared desire strengthen NATO, create another military build-up in Europe. Obviously, in contemporary world, we come back to a situation which was almost half century ago, when Warsaw Pact exists and huge confrontation exists in divided Europe. Just now, situation is worse for Russia because Russia doesn't have so many allies as Soviet Union had before.
All right. Rustem, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your insights as always. Thanks for your time.
Always my pleasure with you guys. Thank you very much.
Good night. All right, that's Rustem Safronov, who's a international relations commentator and joining us, talking to us about the growing forces that are being gathered by the West and growing influence in Southeast Asia, and China and North Korea are not happy with Japan and South Korea being at a NATO meeting as observers.